Section 4, Video 5. In this video, we will be looking at virtual machine disk operations. The first option that we look at is adding disk to a virtual machine. We look at three options. One is adding a new disk, adding an existing disk, or adding an RDM, which is a raw disk map. If you look at the graphic on the right, it shows a screenshot from a graphical user interface, the client, vSphere client. Selecting the drop-down dialog box for add hard disk, we see the three options: a new hard disk, existing hard disk, and add new RDM. However, that's grayed out as there is no RDM present in the system. To add a new hard disk, we select hard disk and we can select the size of that hard disk and the type, whether it's thin provision, thick, or eager zeroed. That will create a new disk. The other option, existing hard disk, is determining an existing disk that is on the system in one of the data stores and attaching it to the virtual machine. A use case for this is an existing server has malfunctioned or crashed, and we want to reuse the disk that it was using. Perhaps it has data that's important to an organization. We can provision a new virtual machine, and using this option of existing hard disk, navigate to the location where that disk is stored and add it to the virtual machine and be able to access that data. In the lower part, we see three options: dependent, independent, persistent, and independent, non-persistent. The default is dependent, which means that whenever we take a snapshot, the disk is included in that snapshot. If you select independent persistent, there's no snapshot taken. And in the second option, independent non-persistent, not only is a snapshot not taken, but the contents of the disk are erased if the virtual machine is powered off. Next, we look at removing a disk, and we have two options: removing from virtual machine and removing from disk. As you see here in the option, if you remove from virtual machine, it simply disconnects the disk, and the disk and its contents are safe and available in one of these data stores. However, when we choose remove from disk, and in the graphic is shown by selecting that checkbox to say delete files from data store, this operation will delete the contents, delete the Vmdk file from the data store. So choose this option very carefully, as the only option left to restore from backup if you're deleting it from the data store. Managing virtual machine storage using VMKFS tools. We look at the utility called VMKFS tools, which is a must-have in any VM admin toolkit. We look at some examples of creating disks and changing format between disk types. The first option we look at is create a thin disk, and the syntax is vmkfs tools-c 200m-d/vmfs volumes myvmfs thin.vmdk. This command will, when executed, create a 200 megabyte thin provision disk in that data store. Creating a disk in eager zeroed format. The only change we notice here is the name of the VMDK and adding -d eager zeroed thick, which is the disk format type. This command will take a little longer to execute, as it will be writing all the zeros, as it's going to be an eager zeroed thick format. We will run these commands in the terminal for a better understanding. Next, we can also change disk format using the different VMKFS tool options. We can inflate disk. This will take a thin provisioned virtual machine disk Vmdk and convert it into a eager zeroed disk. We can use the --K to remove zeroed blocks. When run on a Vmdk, it will reduce it to a thin provisioned Vmdk. --X to extend disk. Suppose we wanted to increase the size of a virtual machine disk from 100 megabytes to 150 megabytes. We will use this command to perform that operation. Lastly, we look at a very powerful command under VMKFS tools, which is clone disk. That allows us to move Vmdk from one location to the other very safely, very reliably, and at the same time we can also make conversion. Let me just go over to the terminal and let's run those commands. So the first command was to create a 200 megabyte thin provision disk. Sorry, there was a small mistake. I forgot to run the full command. So that created a thin disk. Let me repeat that command and just make small changes to run that as a eager zeroed thick. That also ran, and we saw it took slightly longer as it was filling it out with zeros, and it's also displaying the result there. We can also convert between Vmdk formats, so we can take this thin provision and we can see that it is actually thin by checking the disk usage. And it shows that the thin.vmdk we created earlier is occupying 0 megabytes on the data store. So I run the VMKFS tools again, small j, and this, as we know, will inflate it to and convert that into a eager zeroed thick. So it took a little more time. It was writing zeros, and now if we check the disk usage, it is also showing that's now occupying 200 megabytes. The other command that we wanted to show is the clone. So we can use that command. Again, it's part of the VMKFS tools. -I. We have the source, which is where we are. Let's take one of the disks, so eager 0, and this I'm going to move it to I'm moving it to the same data store, but with another name, and during the move I'm going to convert that or move it to the other with another name. Let's say easy clone.vmdk. When I run that command and check the status, we should see 3. So now we have the easy.vmdk, we have the clone, and we have the tin.vmdk. So that concludes our video on VM storage operations, as well as introducing a new command called vmkfs tools, which is extremely powerful command to help the VM admin in performing various operations. To summarize, we looked at virtual disk operations like add and remove, introduced a VM admin toolkit called vmkfs tools, and we saw how we could interchange between virtual disk formats. Thank you for watching, and in the next video, video 6, we will be looking at adding storage to virtual machine ESXi host. Thank you for watching.